Katie, can I start by saying what a credit the Irish women's hockey team is to us all as a country. But moving on from that directly, what do you make of the idea that men and women should compete in the same sports? Is it fair on women?
Thank you very much for having me. I think that there's a lot of sports females out there that would only be delighted to have the opportunity to compete with their male counterparts in their sports. I think it all comes down to whether the physicality of the sport, whether it becomes an advantage for males over females. But there are plenty of sports where I think that you could create a level playing field, because the physicality isn't so much a matter, and it's more about the skill than anything else. So I definitely think there's an opportunity in certain sports.
And I mean, we all remember Stephanie Roach, amazing goals, amazing footballer. But you can have all the skill in the world, and look at the American US football team, fantastic athletes. But physically they are smaller and probably slightly slower and less strong than their male counterparts. Are there some sports where never the twain shall meet?
Yeah, I think especially in the likes of the contact sports where the strength wouldn't be fair. But as I say, it just depends on the context of the sport. And I know that there's a number of sports, like hockey included, that they will never really know until we try these things, because you have to give females the opportunity to get up to speed and to play at the same level as males, and it's kind of one of those things that you won't know until you try.
Yeah. And with regard to hockey, which is obviously your area of expertise, do you think that could possibly be one of the sports where men and women could compete on the same teams? I imagine hockey is about speed and skill as much as it would be about strength.
Yeah, definitely. Hockey's not so much of a contact sport, and the men's game and women's game are very different. But I think that we ourselves as a senior team have experience of training and playing against men's club teams. That's something we do in order to get up to international pace. Yeah. So we've experience of doing it, and there's never been any scenarios where you feel like you're out of your depth. So I think that there is definitely opportunities, and we've benefited from it. And I know that it happens in the likes of hurling and camogie as well, where there's sometimes a crossover. So yeah, and I think it only bodes well for equality in sport and where we want to get to with that as well.
Are we sure that it doesn't? And what I mean by that is exactly as you said, that the women's hockey team might train with the men's hockey team in order to get better, because the men might be stronger or faster, and that if you run, it's like if you run with somebody who's a better runner than you get better too. So I can see why you would do that. And some women might in fact graduate, if they were skilled enough, onto the male team, which would now be a unisex team, and that's good too. But while the two sports are separated, men's hockey and women's hockey, would that not give more women a chance to play women's hockey? Because there are women who might make it onto the women's hockey team, but they wouldn't make it onto a unisex hockey team because they're competing against men.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that's competitive sport, really, and whether you're playing in a mixed sport, it happens in tag rugby all the time. It just becomes more competitive and pushes the level of the game and the standards. And actually, regardless of your gender, that's the way competitive sport is, and that's how you have to train harder and push harder.
And I get all of that, but because it's not a level playing field, God, all these analogies work very well for sports because they are sports analogies. But because it isn't a level playing field, because I'm 5'6", and if I was playing competitive hockey and against maybe a man who was 6'2" with much longer legs, no matter how hard I train, I'm going to struggle, am I, to get onto that team, even if I'm at the top of my game, and even if I'm very good.
Yeah, I suppose so. And there's definitely, that's where the question comes, like, what is the advantage? There's more. There's sports where, the physicality and your size and your strength really would stand to you, but there's other sports where it might not, and it comes down more to your commitment to the sport and how many hours you've put into training certain skills.
And there are certain sports that might be obvious that we could do this with, like snooker, for example, maybe with darts we've seen it, maybe sailing, things like that, that they're kind of obvious. Hockey, because of technical skills and speed, is definitely possible. But do you think even things like rugby, because if you look at a rugby team, the size and shape of people on the rugby team is very different. The backs might be huge and weighty, and then you might have a wing who's lithe and sort of wiry to, for speed. There are sports where different people on a team have different roles, and therefore different builds, for example, might be useful. Should we be looking at it literally on that kind of level of scrutiny?
Yeah, I think rugby's definitely a tricky one because it is such a high contact sport, and you have to look specifically then at the safety of players and whether that's feasible too, with the dangers in the sport. So I think it's very much a case by case scenario, but I do think the idea of it is pretty cool, especially in the likes of soccer.
Yeah. When you play against the men, in training and in challenge matches, how does that go in terms, like, I know it isn't much by way of contact, and it's all about the ball and the hockey stick, but I'm sure when you're both going for a ball, you and a member of the opposing male team, if you get a shoulder or an elbow, you'd know all about it. How easy is it to compete against men?
It's very challenging, but I suppose that's the kind of challenge that we all strive for. It reminds me, whenever we do it, it takes me back to the days whenever I first stepped into senior hockey. So when I was the youngest, maybe the smallest, the least developed, and I stepped in, and there was, an older woman that is at the end of her career, and she was ready to show me what senior hockey is all about. And you did get knocked down a few times, but I don't specifically see it as, men and women, but more so just as someone who's more experienced in the game, and I just need some time to get up to their speed because I'm new to it.
Is there any argument, and I know in New Zealand, for example, minor teams, they play based on weight, not age. Is there an argument for something like that? My daughter used to play rugby on a girls' team, but she was tiny. She's a very small build, and she was probably 5 stone. And we're talking about that level of difference between her and other people on the team. And I was terrified, to be honest, because she was like a waif compared to some people that she was playing with. If we looked at things like that, would gender cease to be an issue, and we would actually be playing in kind of weight classes like they do in boxing or things, along those lines? And maybe not at international competitive level, but certainly at club level, things like that could be done.
Yeah, I think definitely. Like, for example, I played hurling. Me and one of my best friends, we played on the boys hurling team growing up. And as soon as we hit under 16 level, we had to stop doing that, even though we were kind of starting players and were well able to compete. And it was purely just our age that then eliminated us from being able to do that, even though we were stronger and bigger than some of the boys. So there's definitely cases where I think that the size of someone and their strength should outweigh their age and their date of birth. No, I
agree. And can I ask you a last question, Katie? As the captain of the Irish women's hockey team and a professional athlete, and obviously the Irish women's hockey team have done us all proud, would you like to compete against men? Would you like to see, to test yourself and to put yourself up against the biggest and the best that there is, and obviously still win? But would you like to do that? Would that be something you would have a kind of a hunger for?
Yeah, I think there is definitely part of me that would love to do that. But when I think of hockey specifically, the men's and women's game is so different. They're almost like different sports at this stage. So I think what has made us successful and makes us, ourselves, might necessarily be something that would work in the men's game too. So there is that element of it too that I kind of admire about us competing against other females across the world.
Look, thank you for speaking to me today. That is Katie Mullan, their captain of the Irish women's hockey team. What do you think?